any cattle that is out grazing, grass is very slow about coming back. So I suppose just bear in mind the level of grass on the farm at the minute, where he's going to be from a nitrates point of view later on, and has those animals the potential to put on that 1.2, 1.3 kilos a day for the next, whatever, 130 odd days to get them into a decent weight for slaughter.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and I'm joined by Teagasc Beef Specialist David Argue to discuss cattle finished so far this year and budgets for the coming months given current increasing beef prices. David, you're very welcome. Congratulations on your new position as Teagasc Cattle Specialist. You bring a valuable experience and knowledge to the Cattle Specialist team. What previous roles have you had in Teagasc?
So look, I started off with Teagasc back in 2016. I started off as an education officer working over in Teagasc in Mayo. From that, then I moved back to Ballyhaise, where an education position came up again in the college. I was there about 12 months or so, and that led on then to working with the Green Acres calf to beef program. So I was in the Green Acres program for maybe all in all about 15 months or so, and then a permanent position came up as a dry stock advisor in the Teagasc office in Navan. So look, I was based in Navan there for the last 5.5 years. So I was working with the dry stock lads up there. So I was
That's great, David. I would look forward to working with you as part of the cattle specialist team. When we look back so far this year at cattle that have been finished, what numbers of cattle have been finished so far?
Yeah, so looking there, Catherine, at some of the figures that was published by the Department of Agriculture there in the last couple of weeks, we can see there from the weekend, and we'll say March the 16th, 2025, there was a total kill of 37,281 cattle killed. If we look, I suppose, in comparison to last year's kill of the same week, that's up 3,667 cattle, where we'll say 33,600 was killed in the same week last year. I suppose there's a slight increase in the number of steers being killed and a slight increase in the numbers of heifers killed in that week, I would say this year in comparison to last year.
And David, how does this compare to this time last year?
This year, there's just shy of 400,000 cattle killed, 398 odd thousand cattle killed this year to date. In comparison to last year, we're probably ahead about 11,000 odd cattle, so we are to the same date. I suppose the big spike we can see in I suppose categories is with our steers. To this date last year there was 134,500 steers killed, whereas to this date this year there's almost 140 odd thousand steers killed. So I suppose the late winter or the late summer we had last year, and then I suppose cattle got into the house slightly later, maybe potentially behind in weight, has led to some cattle being carried across into 2025, and they're being added into 2025 kills. So they are.
And overall, the live exports so far are reported to be back in comparison to this time last year.
Yeah, so look, there's a tighter supply of cattle across Europe at the moment. I suppose along with, there's been certain movement restrictions that have been implemented due to the spread of bluetongue in different areas. And I suppose they're big factors that are, behind the demand for Irish cattle exports. So there, the number of weanlings and store cattle trading during the start of 2025 is probably trending higher than previous years, and that's due to the strong demand that we have from Northern Ireland, Spain, Eastern Europe, and parts of Northern Africa. The 2025 calf export trade has been slower, and I suppose that is running in line along with later calf registrations. I suppose the bad spring that we had last year probably delayed some of our cows going back in calf, and we can see that now with calves being born slightly later. Up until the end of the first week in March, calf exports had been starting to increase slightly. I think to that date there was about 19 odd thousand calves exported, which would be I think it was a 58% decrease on the same period as last year.
And looking at the prices that's been paid for cattle at the moment, David, they're very good.
They are, absolutely. Cattle are definitely on an upward trend, and it was an interesting figure I heard from Joe Burke the other day at a farm walk we had down in Kilkenny. Beef price, it has increased on average 12 cents per week since the start of January, which, it's a massive amount. But an article that I just read this morning from the Farmers Journal, would indicate that beef price is up another 10 cent again a 10 cent a kilo again this week in most beef plants. So if we're looking at, we'll say, steer prices, the majority of the main processors are quoting between €7 and €7.20 a kilo base price. Heifers, €7.20 to €7.35 euros a kilo base price, with some, with guys, we'll say, that have bigger numbers available, maybe getting closer to 7.40 base for heifers. Cull cows, we'll say, for example, an all-grade and cull cow, they're from €7 to €7.10 a kilo. U-grade cows, €7.20 to €7.30 a kilo, and then some O-grade continental suckler cows, €6.80 to €6.90, with some of the O-grade dairy cows maybe at €6.50 and €6.60 a kilo. And then young bulls, we'll say bulls under 24 months, you're looking at €7.20 to €7.30 a kilo for U-grade and bulls, €7.10 to €7.20 for all-grade and bulls, and €6.90 to €7 for O-grade and bulls this week.
Looking at the questions farmers have at the moment, David, what are the feeding options for farmers that have, 580 to 600 kilo store cattle in the shed this time of year? What advice have you?
It's something that a lot of farmers are asking themselves at the moment. Typically maybe they would have had forward store cattle this time of year, and maybe they would have typically, let them out to grass, would have kept them inside in the shed. Now, listen, there's plenty of options, I suppose. The way I look at it is they've three great options at the moment. The first option is they can take those animals out and sell them and avail of the high live price per kilo for them at the moment. The second option is leave those cattle inside in a shed and finish them, in 90 days. Or the third option is turn them out to grass and feed them, for 4.5 months and kill them the middle of July off grass. But in doing that, in leaving cattle in or in turning cattle back out, there's a couple of things you just have to take into consideration, And I suppose we'll take, first of all, if we're going to graze these cattle, if we're going to let them out to grass and graze them. First of all, in previous years, if farmers didn't turn them out to grass, and they're making the decision this year to turn them out, well, what have they done differently on their farm this year to set them cattle up for grazing? We'll say, have the extra grass growing? Have they got, are they fit to handle a higher stocking rate in the farm for having an extra group of cattle turned out? The other thing they need to look at is, if these cattle have been in for the last couple of months, what level of feeding have they been on? Now, I don't mean, have they been fed for slaughter, but have they been on, a kilo or kilo and a half a meal, or what sort of condition are they in? And the reason I'm asking that is, if they're in slightly forward condition, letting those cattle back out to grass, they may not do, that 1.2, 1.3 kilo per day of a tribe that we're looking for in order to get them into a decent weight in the middle of the summer for slaughter. And then the last thing that I'd probably ask them farmers is, typically if they've been killing cattle, we'll say, for example, the start of June every year, end of May, start of June every year, out of the shed, and they're going to delay killing this year because they're grazing them. Can they do without that money for that extra couple of months? Is cash flow going to be a problem, or how are they going to be fixed? We'll say with cash on the farm. So look, at them, just a couple of things that I take into consideration if we're going to graze. The flip side of that is, Catherine, if we're going to leave them inside and feed them indoors, the first thing I'd look at is, have we enough silage in the pit? And from speaking to some farmers, I know we've had a good back end, but silage is starting to get tight on some farms, this time of year. So is there enough silage in the yard to finish these cattle for the next 90 or 100 days? And the second thing is, if we leave these cattle in and don't graze them, are we prepared to go out and give, the good store price for lighter cattle to graze the grass? So there's just a couple of things we need to take into consideration when making up our mind if we're going to graze cattle or if we're going to feed them inside indoors for the next couple of months. So look, if we go back to this 600 kilo animal, if we decide to leave him inside in the shed and we feed him for the next 90 days, we'll take, for example, he's 600 kilos. We're hoping to get him into 700 kilos in 90 days. So we'll be aiming to slaughter him on the 1st of June. So, for example, that bullock is going to eat, we'll say, silage and 6 kilos of meal. The total concentrates he's going to eat is going to be 90 days at 6 kilos is 540 kilos of concentrates, and that is €183. And in silage terms, we'll say he's going to eat 710 kilos of silage, which has a value of €128. So it's going to cost a total of €311 to feed that bullock from now until the start of June when he's fit for slaughter. We'll say at the start of June then he's 700 kilos. We're going to kill him at 56%, so he's 392 kilos dead. The flip side of that then is we turn him out to grass. So he's gone out at 600 odd kilos, 580, 600 kilos. We'll graze him for 135 days or 4.5 months. In that period of time, we'll say we'll give him 60 days meal feeding. We'll say the last 60 days he'd be fed meal just about enough condition on him at a level of 6 kilos per day. So we're hoping that bullock will put on, 175 odd kilos in the 135 days, it's about 1.2, 1.3 kilos of gain per day. So again, in that period of time, he's going to need 360 kilos of meal and 1.55 tons of grass, which gives you a total cost of €215 to feed that animal for the next 4.5 months out of grass. Now, I suppose what we're looking at there, you have an extra weight gain of €42 kilos in carcass, and you have a reduced cost of up on €100 in feed costs for that bullock that's going back to grass. So if the beef price stays the way it is, based on those figures, it'd look like the better option to turn that animal back out to grass and feed him for 2 months longer, but you're going to be gaining an extra weight gain, so you are in cheaper feed costs.
It really comes down to the costs and looking at the budgets, David, and seeing what's coming out of the cheaper option.
It does, absolutely, yeah. And look, it goes back to those couple of things I said there, when the farmer's making up his mind whether to turn them out or not. Like, if he hasn't got enough grass available at the moment, and grass is slow at the minute, growth is quite back on what we would expect. Any cattle that is out grazing, grass is very slow about coming back. So I suppose just bear in mind the level of grass on the farm at the minute, where he's going to be from a nitrates point of view later on, and has those animals the potential to put on that 1.2, 1.3 kilos a day for the next, 130 odd days to get them into a decent weight for slaughter.
And looking at the targets for the second grazing season, David, what are the key targets when cattle are going to grass?
If they're going to grass and just getting grass all summer, listen, our target is probably close to a kilo a day. Look, we talk about 210 days grazing for a lot of these store cattle, with the intention of putting on 200 kilos of live weight. So you're talking about a kilo a day. Listen, early on in the year, this time of year, when there's good quality spring grass available, we'll be hoping to get 1.2, 1.3 kilos per day. Later on in the year, when grass quality starts to deteriorate, you're probably going to be back at 0.8, 0.9. But on average, you're probably looking at about a kilo a day from torn out to housing. Now, that's going to change, obviously, if meal is introduced later on in the back end to heavier cattle. If for those guys that want to slaughter cattle off grass and they're putting in 4 or 5 or 6 kilos of meal of grass, that weight is going to obviously that weight gain is going to obviously increase.
David, looking at a 400 kilo steer going to grass at the moment, what are the costs of production, selling that animal as a 20-month store or 24-month finished steer?
It's quite a common system, Catherine, and it's something I would have come across quite a bit with the farmers I was dealing with up in Navan. So look, obviously going out and buying a 380 or 400 kilo steer now, grazing them all summer and selling them in the back end as a forward store bullock for somebody else to go and further finish them. So if we take, for example, we're going to try and graze him for 7 months of the year or 210 days. He's gone out of 400 kilos. The 1st of October, we'll say he's 600 kilos. We'll take an average of him being 500 kilos across the year. And if we work out, 2% of his body weight, we'll say on intake, we're looking at 2.1 ton of grass that animal is going to eat for the 7 months of the year. And look, if we assume, grass is 6 cents a kilo, that's working out to be €126 to feed that animal just on grass with no meal for the summer. So I suppose the other side of that is then, so that's obviously selling him, we'll say, on the 1st of October. If we didn't sell him, we decide to put him in the house and feed him for, 100 days and kill him in the start of January. Obviously, it's going to cost that €126 to feed him till the 1st of October. When he goes into the house, then he's going to obviously eat 810 kilos of grass silage, and that's got a cost of €146. And we'll say he's in 6 kilos of meal for 100 days, which is 600 kilos of meal, and that's the value of €204. So look, it's just costing under €500 to finish that animal on feed alone on the start of January. So it is. So look, you have a bullock there costing €126 to graze for the summer at grass and sell him. You could then put him in the house and further finish him, but it'll cost you up in the best part of €500 in feed cost to finish that bullock next January. So it will.
So really is important to be going back and looking at the cost of production, David, for any of the systems. Finally, David, looking at the heifer systems, what should farmers be keeping in mind?
Yeah, so look, again, Catherine, more than the store bullock system, the store heifers or the store heifer system is quite common as well. So we'll take, for example, there, a farmer buying store heifers this time of year, 380, 400 kilos. and grazing them for the summer with 60 days of meal feeding at the very end, and killing them off grass, you're looking at a feed cost of €207 there to feed that animal. And that's taking into consideration your grass and your meal feeding, as opposed to, I suppose, putting that heifer inside in the shed in October and bringing her right through and killing her the middle of December. On, we'll say, 70 days feeding inside in the shed on 5 kilos of meal, you're looking at a cost of €340 to finish that animal. So yeah, so look at you're obviously going to be looking at a higher carcass weight. So there could be up to 40 kilos of carcass more to be gained from putting that animal back to the shed and killing it. But you will have an extra feed cost of 135 odd euros when it comes to silage and meal. So look, I suppose, again, as you said, it's just be careful, be mindful, but looking at the budgets and finishing these animals.
That's great, David. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine. No problem.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to David for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you'll never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.